from that API response, from raw text to a dictionary in a controllable way, that changes everything. All right, OpenAI function calling. This is a very exciting new feature, but it's a bit of a tricky one. You have to see some examples, play around with it in order to fully grasp the idea and the possibilities here. But if you're serious about working with large language models, building applications around them, then this video is a must watch. And you really have to understand this concept of function calling, because it solves a lot of the problems that you're currently running into when you're trying to build applications around large language models. It's really a deterministic way of extracting information from these large language models, and they will change everything. All right, so let's get into it. Now, this will be a hands-on tutorial. Like most of my videos, I'm really gonna walk you through some code examples, which I will make available on my GitHub repository as well. So this will all be under the LangChain experiments. Link will be in the description. And today we will be working from the OpenAI function calling.py file with some examples that I will be walking you through. Now, I've checked out some other videos of people showing how to work with function calling from OpenAI, but most of them just cover the basic example that you can see here in the blog post basically. And this doesn't give the full scope of what's possible. So I really want to give you some more in-depth examples, really show you how you could potentially incorporate this into an application. Like for example, I'm incorporating this into a chatbot right now. So really getting information from the LLM and then based on that information, deciding where the call should go next. Really powerful stuff. So those are kind of the concepts that I want to explain to you. Now, if you want to follow along, you need a Python installation and an OpenAI key. No access to GPT-4 is required. I will be walking you through this example within VS Code. And if you're interested about copying this setup, how I work with my data science projects and AI projects, then check out the link in the description. I've been getting a lot of questions about that. But for now, let's launch an interactive Python session over here, do the imports, load the OpenAI API key, and get started. So make sure you're in the correct environment, make sure you have these dependencies, which are in the requirements.txt, and then we can basically get started. And now throughout this demonstration, I will be running you through an example through a hypothetical case study of an intelligent agent basically for an airport. So this could be a customer server agent that can help customers with questions, with inquiries. And before I can really show you how these functions work, we must first look at how the API normally functions, operates basically. So if we load the OpenAI library basically, and we call the chat completion model, we can then put in a model over there. So this is the new GPT 3.5 Turbo one. And we can also put in a message. So if you're not familiar with this, I would suggest looking up how this basically works, this structure. But you specify a role, and then you basically ask the question. And we can also specify a system role to give the AI basically some instruction on how to behave. But for now, we just do a simple question. When's the next flight from Amsterdam to New York? So we can just run that and wait for it to complete. And then first have a look at the completion itself. So here we can see the original object that we're getting back from the API. So there are various attributes in here that we can access, but ultimately we are interested in the content over here, which is under choices, content, and then basically the first one within that list. So what we can then do is we call, hey, we want the output. And if we have a look at that, we can say, hey, I'm sorry, I cannot directly provide real-time flight information as the data keeps changing. Okay, so here we've extracted the content, the original response basically from the large language model, but because it does not have access to the internet, it cannot help us with this user inquiry of wanting to understand or get information about the customer's flight. So this is not a very intelligent agent, and it can only provide us with answers based on what the model was trained on. No live or internal data that we can use, that we have access to right now. So how you would counter this without functions is you could basically get this query, this question basically from the user, and then instruct an LLM basically to extract the keywords, for example, Amsterdam and New York, from that, and then output that as like a JSON object. So that would literally be you prompt engineering, hey, we have this inquiry information about Amsterdam, New York. If it's about flight information, convert it or output it in such a way where you have a JSON object with location 1, location 2, etc. See where I'm going with this? This can really easily become quite tricky, especially when your application scales, for example, and there are lots of questions that you have to be able to handle. Plus, these models are non-deterministic, meaning you never know exactly what you're going to get out of it. Even if you're really specific and you set the temperature low, based on a user's inquiry, a question, if they phrase it like completely different, like it might throw off the LLM and not just produce a JSON as output, but add some additional text as well. And then if you want to capture that within a function, parse it, whatever, get the arguments, you might run into errors. Then you have to use like regular expressions or whatever. Like I've said, it gets messy real quick. All right, so now I hope you understand the limitations of working with large language models like this. And now we are going to look into how can we bypass this. I'm sorry, I cannot provide real-time flight information. Okay, so now we have set the stage and we can really talk about what functions are. And now, before I dive into this function description with you, this huge block of text, I want to first show you where to put this once it's done. And that is within the block of code that you can use to create the chat completion. So remember how we, in the first place, created the response like this. We can now get another response by putting the function description over here. And then we also add the additional parameter of the function called auto, which we will get into in a bit. But that is just to provide you with some context. So now look at what is actually this thing going on over here. So it's a description of a function that doesn't exist yet. And I think that is a really important concept to understand. So this does not look at your Python code. This does not look at whatever libraries you've loaded. This is just plain text, an object, basically, that we will send to the API to provide it with context. Now later, like I will show you, we are going to actually create the function, but it's good to understand that it doesn't have to be created when you interact with the API. So now let's look at how to construct this function description. And as of right now, I believe if you follow the example from OpenAI, there are 3 keys in here that you have to assign. That is a name. So this is the name of your function. Then your description. So you describe what this function actually does. And then we have the parameters, which is an object, a nested object basically, which has a type and then properties and then requires. So let's have a quick look at what's going on over here. So this function has the description get flight information between 2 locations. So this gives the API some context. Okay, this is what it's about. Then we look at the parameters. So, okay, this is a function and it requires some input parameters in order to get the flight information. And what are those parameters? Well, first of all, it's an object and it has properties. And the properties are, first of all, the location of the origin and the location of the destination. And we can see in here, they're both a string. So the API also understands this is text output. And we can also add a description over here and even provide it with an example of what it should look like. And in this case, it's the abbreviation basically of the city. So Hamburg and Düsseldorf. Okay, so now with this description of the function, and as you can see, it's within a list. So you can also add multiple functions, which we will get into in a bit, but we start with one. What we can do is, let me store this in memory and then also store the prompt. So we have the same question. We use the same API, the same model, the same message, but we add the function description as well. And we set the function call to auto. Let's see what it will actually do for us. So let's wait for that completion. And then again, it's important to note the function does not exist. This is just a description that we're providing the API with. And now let's see what the output looks like and print it. Now, and this is where it gets exciting. So remember before we were getting the answer, I'm sorry, but I cannot directly provide you, etc. But right now, if we look at the actual message, so we can first look at the whole completion, and you can here see the message. So if we just focus on that, print that, we can see role assistant, and then we have content, and then we have a function call parameter in here, a function call key. And what we can see in here, we have a name, get flight info, and we have the arguments, location origin, AMS, location destination, JFK. So this is quite interesting. See what's going on over here? So it interpreted the question from the user, and it understands that it has to convert Amsterdam to AMS and New York to JFK. So it converts it to the actual flight tickers based on the descriptions that we've provided over here. And now it also provides just that in the form of an arguments key that we can access here. And this is an object that we can use because we've defined that we want an object. And now this is really where it gets interesting. Okay, so now we have these arguments basically, but what can we do with it? Okay, so let's continue to the actual function that we've created here in Python. And now, like I've said, the API does not require the actual function, but in a real world scenario, what you would typically do is you would first create your function. So this could be a function with an open API, with an external API or an internal API to gather data, customer information, whatever, do some kind of like calculations, just any use case that you would use an API for. And you turn that into a function and you define the parameters. That is then the starting point. So let's have a look at this get flight info. So we make sure that the name of the function matches, and then also the input parameters of location origin and location destination. And let's see what it does. So it's pretty simple right now. We've hard-coded the information. So it gives us some a JSON object back basically based on this information. But you could easily swap this out to make a real connection with an API. Okay, so now let's see what we can do with the output that we got from the model. So again, let me print it one more time. Here's the output. And here, what we can do is we can extract the parameters. So let me actually show you what's going on over here. So we start with the output, and then we call .function call .arguments. So function call arguments. Let's have a look at that. That is the object that we're looking for. And then we put that into a JSON loads. So as you can see right here, it's a string right now. But if we call a JSON loads and put that in, we have now converted this into an actual Python object. It's dictionary essentially under the hood, which we can use to get attributes from, get keys from. So we can now call get and then insert location origin to, let me do that, get AMS. Pretty cool, right? Okay, so let's store that, and we do that in a similar fashion for the destination. So let's run that line, see what that includes, and now that is JFK. And we can also, without using the get function, just store the arguments, and these are now the params. And if we, so we can print them all out, but let me also show you if we run the params. This is an actual dictionary. So this is something you really have to understand. What we basically did right now is from an unstructured user input question, we have converted that into an actual dictionary structured in a way that we have control over. And that is such a big thing. And this is something, if you don't fully grasp it yet, it's something you will learn down the line when you start to actually build applications around these models. But this is really a big thing. Getting from that API response, from raw text to a dictionary in a controllable way, that changes everything. Because what we can now do, based again on the output, we can first extract the name of the function using the Python's eval method. So let's quickly run that. And now chosen function is our getFlight function over here. So imagine we can do this all programmatically based on rules, if statements, based on various functions that we provide the model with. And we can then extract the function that it picked. And now, for the real magic, we can get the chosen function and then put in the params and use 2 asterisks to unpack the variables. So if we have a look at the params one more time, it's an object. And if we use 2 asterisks, we can unpack that and we run the function and we can print the flight. So here you can see location, origin, AMS, JFK. We have the daytime in here. We have the airline and we have the flight. And now within this object, we have all the information that we need in order to provide the customer with a proper response. So let's see what we can do right now if we put this back into the model. So now we basically create a second completion. So there would be an intermediate step. After a customer asks a question, you run the API 2 times. First, you run it to call the function, get the output, and then run it through the function. And then here's the key. You basically add the function output back to the message with the role function. So let's see how that works. So we first have the messages and we add the user question. This is the user prompt. So again, this is the question, what's the next flight from Amsterdam to New York? But now we add the next one, role function name, and then we provide output function name. So again, this is just the name. And then for content, this is important, we add the flight information here. And now what this will do, this will provide the model with all the information it needs in order to draft the response. So let's run this, get the response. The next flight from Amsterdam, AMS to New York, JFK is on July 6, 2023 at 18:26. The airline is KLM and the flight number is KL643. Beautiful, right? This is so cool. And if you understand this correctly, like I've said, you can build some really, really cool things. All right, this already should put you ahead of most people's understanding of how these function calling methods work. But I want to show you one more thing about using multiple functions and how to go about that. So here's a new function descriptions multiple variable where there are 3 functions. First, we have the same one, get flight info. You're already familiar with that one. But then we also have book a flight. And in here we have location, origin, destination, daytime, and the airline. So we need information from the get flight info in order to book a flight. And then we also have the file a complaint. So this is a function that a customer can use to file a complaint. So we have a name, email, and a text. So let's see. Let's first store that in memory. Print it. So we have a list with 3 objects in here, 3 descriptions. And now here's a quick function, ask and reply, that basically completes the chat completion and then inputs the function descriptions multiple. So like I've said, let's store that. And now let's go through these examples, starting with scenario 1, where we check the flight details. So this is similar to what we've done before, but now remember that the model or the API can choose from the different functions. And now this is where the parameter of auto comes into place. So we have function call auto, which basically means go over all the functions that you have access to and pick the best one based on the names, the descriptions, the parameters, etc. You can also change this to a specific name. So you could also call, for example, file complaint and force it to use file complaint. So within various steps within your application, it might be desirable to leave it on auto, or sometimes it might be convenient to enforce a certain function. So that's that. So let's do that one more time. So if the user prompt and then we print the reply. Okay, so what we do, and just to clarify, we don't do the extra step where we feed it back into the model because I've just shown you how to do that. This is just to check, okay, what are the functions doing and what are the answers, basically the replies that we're getting. So here we can see we have a similar response. It uses the get flight info and we have the AMS and the JFK. So we've validated that based on 3 functions, with this query, it is able to pick the correct one. So then let's process all of that again, and then let's print it. Again, this is similar to what we did. We can validate it, AMS, JFK, and we have the parameters. Okay, but now let's load also the datetime and the airline. So based on the response, so the flight, which is an object, we can also extract the information. So now we have the flight datetime and we have the flight airline. And now remember, this is only possible because we first got the function parameters, then called our internal function to get the data from our database, which was hard-coded. But that's why this is possible. That's how we were able to get the flight datetime and the flight airline. Okay, so now we can move into scenario 2, where we are going to book a new flight. So again, this is just hard-coded, but you can all make this programmatically. But now let's change the user prompt to, I want to book a flight from origin to destination on flight datetime and then flight airline. Okay, so now it understood correctly that we need the book flight function. And let's have a quick look again. The book flight, it has location, origin, destination, datetime, and airline. And because of that, we now have all of that information here. All right, so now let's make the final step over here, scenario 3, which is file a complaint. Okay, and it understood correctly that we have to file a complaint, and it extracted the name. We got the email correctly, and here is the message basically. So the complaint itself, it was unpleasant surprise because the flight was missed. Now let's make this conversational. So this was step by step to check, validate basically. Okay, we have multiple functions. And what if we interact with this using natural language? Will it be able to pick up on the correct ones? And for this, we're going to use the chat OpenAI model from LangChain, provide it with the model and the temperature, and store that as the LLM. And then we have the user prompt over here, which is basically everything that we just went through, but now it's in one prompt. So it's explaining, hey, I want to do several things. I want to get some flight information, then book it, and also file a complaint. Here's my information. So let's store that. And now let's construct the first response. And now since we're using LangChain, it's a little different, but we're still like under the hood, like generating the messages in a structure. So the first response is we take the LLM and we predict the message, which we put in as content is the user prompt. So that is this. And then the functions is what we have over here. And then we have the response and we say, hey, function call name get flight info. Okay, so this is still as expected. Based on this prompt, it first identifies that I need to get the flight info. So it does the function call get flight info. And now what's interesting here, so remember before we providing multiple functions but one prompt. Now we have multiple functions and one prompt with multiple questions within it. So it gets more complex. And now to continue with this, we just extend the messages that we're providing to the API. And now since we're using LangChain, this looks a little bit different. So we're using the human message and the AI message template. And if we go to LangChain documentation, you have system messages, human messages, and AI messages, which are used for representing information coming from the AI system. And I could only get it to work by providing it double. So first like the content and then the description of the actual function. But this is probably something that I don't quite understand yet. Like I've said, since it's an additional thing that you have to look into with LangChain. But if we run it like this, so we build up the conversation and then do the second try. So let's see. So first response, we were getting the get flight info. And now for the second response, we have the book flight function. Remember, same prompt, some additional information. Now it understands, okay, I have the flight information, so I can book the flight. And we can go on with the third one, run that. And now it understands correctly that it's now time to file the complaint. So again, goes through the prompt, checks, okay, what are the actions that I have to do based on the user query, check it off, then looks through the history when it makes another call and it decides, okay, now it's time to file the complaint. And then to wrap it all up, let's run it one more time. So now essentially the bot, the AI, has completed all the tasks with the functions it has access to. So let's see what we get. So now we don't get a function call. Like you see, content, function call in the third response. Now in the fourth response, we just get content. I've successfully booked the flight from Amsterdam to New York for you. The next available flight is on Jan 1st and it's with Lufthansa. Okay, now this is interesting to see where it seems like it's hallucinating on this one. It did file the complaint on your behalf regarding the missed flight. An email copy was sent to the correct email. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. All right, so it seems to do a pretty good job, but it's definitely hallucinating on the date and the airliner because we have not called the get flight info function within this chain of questioning. So if we look at the first response, so that is get flight info and we get AMS and JFK. And then if we do the second response, we do get the book flight, but it hallucinates on the dates and times over here. So that is where that is coming from. And that is because let's see, if we say that if we book a flight, it's required. So it needs a daytime and an airline. And you can see that it just takes the description. So for example, this is the date it took, and this is the airliner that it took. So that is, I think, also could be a nice thing. So when there is no information, you can put in some default values, but you can also definitely implement some error handling, some catching in all of that. And that is just because we did not call the info for the next prompt like we were doing in the first scenario. So that is just something to keep in mind, that if you don't have the information and you have a description, it will just fill it in. But hey, other than that, I think this was a nice loop. So we completed all the three functions and then eventually it showed, hey, this is the final message that I can present to the user, which you could do in the form of an agent, a chat message, an email, whatever. All right, and that's it. So I now hope that you have a solid understanding of how to work with the new function calling methods for the OpenAI APIs. Like I've said, really powerful stuff. I will definitely be deep diving into this more, potentially create some more videos around this, because this is really the key if you want to create cool applications with large language models. So if you want to stay updated on that, if you want to stay tuned, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Also, please leave a like if you found this video helpful. And if you're serious about learning data science and artificial intelligence, then you should consider subscribing to my newsletter. First link in the top comment that I will pin below this video. I have some exciting announcements planned for that, so make sure to stay tuned. And now, if you want to learn more about creating applications with large language models, then you should really check out my video on LangChain, which I will link up here. That should give you a really good deep dive understanding into how the LangChain library works and what you can do with it.